So in our evaluation, we found that the community had suffered a devastating loss of jobs and tax revenues, and that the concern that this business had was about losing money. The grief over the loss of major economic base and income was handled in a very difficult and I think destructive way. And what we found that there was a sense of grief and depression in this community that was being handled by attacking one another and blaming one another. And the very first meeting we had with 40 key leaders in this community erupted into a conflict. And so our very well-crafted and well-designed workshop to work with these leaders went out the window. And this is the one thing that I think it's important for leaders to learn, and that is that you may be well prepared to do what you think you've been asked to do, but when you get into the situation and you read it, what I call read reality truthfully, you may have to change and shift gears. So one of the businessmen in this group used some derogatory language about another person in the group who he said was blocking economic progress. And so immediately we had what we call the red flag rule. When something happens where your emotions get so inflamed that you can't even listen and you can't even participate and you've left the room, you just say red flag. So we had a red flag moment and we had to stop everything and try to help this group to be more civil with each other and to have respectful dialogue. And I know that's one of the values that you have here at the school. Without this ability, nothing of consequence can really happen in a group. An inappropriate behavior, if ignored, inhibits risk-taking, honest communication, and most of all, learning. It destroys the trust that is essential in any group. So in the 4 years that we've worked with every single positional leader in that community, they've made incredible progress. They have what we call the community norms of civil discourse. And I think much of what we've done there has been attributed to learning how to manage change. So learning to manage change is critical. The fifth lesson is leaders know themselves. They call individuals into territory where they can develop skills and discover their true self. And I think the real work of leadership is helping leaders to trust themselves as an instrument of change and transformation. And this begins with really understanding who you are. I think that self-development, understanding yourself, is foundational to effective action in the world. So it's not about me inviting you to navel gaze and ponder alone, but to actually begin to understand yourself. And this is going to require what I call the practice of introspection and self-reflection. And this means, and I watched this when I was walking through your school this morning, some of you quietly reading, some of you quietly talking with each other, engaging each other, but some of you actually in silence and solitude, I guess pondering ideas, wandering, whatever. I don't think it's wasteful time. I think it's a very rich time in which you really discover what I say is the root of imagination, the foundation for your dreams and your hopes. And I think as Richard Niebuhr, the philosopher, writes, self-knowledge is no mere luxury to be cultivated during idle moments. It is essential to the responsible life. And the sixth lesson is to know your core values. You do have core values of the school, but you individually have values as well. And those core values are extremely important because leadership is not value neutral. It is value based. So when people say, when I ask them, who are the leaders, give me some examples of leaders. Leaders like Hitler don't count because leaders like Hitler did not have a value of human rights or human respect. And your values influence how you perceive, what you assume and what you do, and how you respond to other people. And so much of the work I do in leadership education is about people's assumptions that drive their behaviors and that create conditions in which people cannot learn and grow. So learning what it is that's important to you and whether or not your beliefs and your values are congruent with what you do is also very, very important. Whenever you think of a person who has true integrity and effective leadership, it's because there's congruence between what they believe and value and what it is that they do. One example of this is a young woman by the name of Tonda Strong, who was in the program that I ran, the Lilly Endowment Leadership Education Program. And Tonda was trained by us, but she obviously came with some gifts. She took what she learned in our program back to Kingsport, Tennessee. And in just 2 years, because change takes time, she was able to transform her entire community. Well, how did she do this? Well, she did it by being really clear about what her own values were. But she also was very able to seek out other individuals and share her experience with them and tell them what she had learned. But she also shared her vision of what she thought could happen in her community. And her genuine care for other people and her love of her community made her able to be listened to by other people. And she then also used tools that we had given her. And one of those tools is what we call the history timeline. And the history timeline actually invites people into looking at how did your community get started. For example, I would want you to be able to tell me the founding story of this school. I should be able to talk to any one of you in this room and ask you, well, how did University High School get started? Who started it and why? And what were the guiding principles and values that started this school? And so the founding story is critically important. And then she was able to have people talk about how did the community grow and develop over time? What were the challenges? I didn't do that. That woke everybody up, didn't it? What were the challenges that this community has faced and how has it grown over time? And in doing that, she helped them to celebrate the community's strengths as well as the challenges that it still faced. And to be able to say, look at what we've been able to do, but there's so much more work to do. I think Tonda succeeded in facilitating the creation of a new way of leading and of providing, I think, a place and a space where competitiveness and partisanship were put aside for the sake of improving the lives of not only the current residents, but future residents to come. So what are some examples of people that you can cite who, I think, exemplify this kind of leadership? And I'm not asking you to talk out loud right now, but just think of a couple of names because you're going to share those with some of the people sitting next to you in just a little bit. The seventh lesson is leaders keep expanding the circle. Their circle of friends, their circle of acquaintances, and they move out of their comfort zone and they can relate and connect with those people who are different from them. And I think, like your generation, they appreciate how diverse and interconnected the inhabitants of this globe are. And there are numerous examples. How many of you actually listen to NPR on your way to school? Or your parents do? Only 3 or 4 of you? Oh, a lot of you. Good. So if you were listening this morning, you actually heard what happens in Europe. In fact, I think the direct quote is, if Europe fails, we fail. It's very true that we're so interconnected with people across the globe that what happens thousands and thousands of miles away affect us. And I think the tenuous security and stability of the U.S. economy is just one example. But what I think is happening in the larger culture is that it is challenging the United States, I think, legacy of individualism. We have a very strong streak of individualism in our country, which makes us think that you can do it by yourself, that you can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And I think that's being challenged, that our destiny is only in our hands. And I think the capacity, and this is really important, I think, for you in this room to hear, to survive and thrive in the future rests with those of you who will expand your circles of people that you get to know and be the boundary spanners, the interpreters and translators of different cultures and different people. I think understanding and appreciating diversity is not just a moral act, but it is just smart business, political necessity, and essential to the good society. So I want you to find one person in this community that you really don't know very well in the next week. Is there anybody who doesn't know anyone very well in this group? You're all looking around like, we all know each other. Well, there have to be some people you need to get to know a little better. Someone that you never even really spent that much time with. So are you doing it now? I want you to do it next week. You're self-monitoring too, I love it. I don't have to tell you to be quiet, you're telling yourself to be quiet. That's a great, great example, I think, of leadership. So find someone and spend some time with them, getting to know them, and hearing their story, so that you can see that there are a lot of things you have in common, and a lot of differences as well, but you'll be able to respect those differences. I think you'll be quite surprised. The 8th lesson is that leaders who make a real difference have a service mindset. And so volunteerism is extremely important. And I think that all of you are volunteers in some way. So what are some of the things that you do? You volunteer what? For food pantries? For tutoring? Are any of you volunteering? Yeah. So what are some of the things that you're doing? Special Olympics? I heard that. What else? Smart Wheels? Oh, school of them. Okay, great, great. Okay, what else? United Way? That's great, yeah. So you're already involved in the community. So service to others, I think, is extremely important. And I think when I ask adults about their very first experience of leadership, you know what it is that they usually say? They say it was a volunteer activity that they were engaged in which they were serving other people. And this has taught me that leadership really involves giving of yourself for the benefit of others. And when I ask them to tell me who in your life has held you in trust, who has done this for you, and they tell me that usually it's a parent or a teacher or a boss and sometimes a priest. And I ask them, what are the qualities and characteristics of these people? And what they most often tell me is that they're caring people. They're compassionate people. They think of other people. They serve others. And most importantly, they saw something in me that I did not even see in myself. And they nurtured it and cultivated and held it until I was ready to own it. So, you know, these were individuals who were motivated to help others, not out of ego, but out of altruism, a love of humankind. Now, the 9th lesson, and I'm almost to 10, good leaders know how and when to follow. So it isn't always about being out front. Sometimes it's about being behind the scenes, and sometimes it's just about being the person who listens. The top-down model of leadership is no longer going to work very well in the changing world that we're in. It works really well in managing crises, but it's not sustainable, nor is it effective when you have to affect transformational change over a long period of time. The model of leadership that we're moving into is a circular model, one like you are experiencing here, the community of equals. There's a first among equals, and that's probably your teacher. But the teachers that I've seen this morning are people who share the authority in their classroom. They don't think they're the only repository of wisdom and information. They call on you, and they call on your thoughts and your learning as well. They learned, and this is really important, at one of the most prestigious universities in the country, Harvard. They put together the best and brightest students, and they say, here's an exercise we want you to do. It's about survival. And every year, the class fails. These are the best and brightest students. And they're shocked because they fail. They're not used to failure. And then the instructor puts them in small groups and gives them a task in which their survival is at stake as well. And each time they succeed. Well, the lesson is that the collective knowledge and wisdom in any group, when tapped, will most often evoke better options and decisions than those made by any one individual, no matter how brilliant they are, who's in isolation. The last lesson I want to share with you all before you get the chance to talk is leaders are lifelong learners. And this is what I call being in the mode of living the question, the mode of being open to questions, the mode of being open to learning, the mode of being able to actually have your own beliefs and thoughts challenged by other people.